tape.
Before Star Fox 64 explains anything, it gives you Corneria, one tiny ship, a handful of geometric buildings, and a blue sky taking up half your CRT. If you were 10 when you saw this, Corneria didn't feel like a level loading. It felt like the screen just cracked open. Water's rushing underneath, lasers cutting through the sky, enemy ships dropping into frame right on cue, Pepe's barking orders, Slippy's having a very public work emergency, and Falco, well, he's just personally insulted you asked him to show up. Then the piece of plastic in your hand actually kicks, and for a few minutes, that little ship feels like it was dropped into a firefight the N64 could barely contain, because technically it wasn't containing it. It was just all smoke and mirrors. The console isn't actually rendering a full war. I know, right? Corneria looks wide open when you're a kid, but go back now and the trick is incredibly obvious. You aren't exploring. The game is dragging you forward by the collar. It chooses the angle, it handles the speed, it decides exactly when those buildings slide underneath you and when the sky opens back up. Critics back then called Star Fox 64 a corridor shooter, and they were right. It's a very loud, very well-decorated corridor filled with lasers, but that corridor is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Enemy ships don't wander into a dynamic battlefield. They arrive exactly where the camera needs them. The buildings are just readable chunks of shapes passing underneath the R-wing at a specific clip. Explosions pop in close enough to feel dangerous, then fade out before the frame rate tanks. You don't feel boxed in because the game is constantly focusing your attention on the next immediate crisis. I mean, Miyamoto talked about Star Fox entirely through motion, acceleration, braking, boosting, hitting the brakes right before a wall, boosting through gaps, slipping between falling scenery, maybe with an inch of clearance. Every enemy wave and sudden oh crap moment is a staged event, but when the controller is vibrating in your hand, you don't feel the stagecraft. You feel like you barely survive. The R-wing stays small, the world is mostly implied, and the screen just keeps moving, suggesting that the real war is happening just past the plastic bezels of your television. Pause Star Fox today and it looks deeply fragile. I mean, the models are basic, the explosions are flat bitmaps, Fox and his crew basically look like Jim Henson rejects who stumbled into a Polygon air show and somehow walked out with military clearance. But the game wasn't built for a pause button, it was built for movement. I mean, the R-wing reads instantly, the enemy ships have clean shaped silhouettes, the scenery is chunky enough to understand, but you're flying past it too fast to really complain about the textures. Clarity was a luxury on the N64. Early 3D got ugly fast. Textures smeared, cameras panicked, the distance could turn into this ugly, foggy oatmeal. I mean, half the time, the hardest enemy in the 90s 3D game was just figuring out what the hell you were looking at in the first place. Star Fox 64 kept the image blunt. And there's a weird confidence in that. I mean, Nintendo knew they didn't have the polygons to lie in detail, so they lied with motion instead. Takayuki Takano talked about keeping the character animation simple and puppet-like, and the technical restraints ended up becoming the game's whole identity. The jerky little portraits, the stiff expressions, the mouths flapping through highly compressed radio clips. It should feel cheap, but instead it just feels like Star Fox, right? The polygons really only have to hold together long enough for your brain to finish the shot. Whoever designed Corneria's sky deserves a pension. If it was packed with intricate detail, you'd start bumping into the edge of the simulation. I mean, instead the horizon sits low, the city drops away, the sky just eats up the top half of the frame. The R-wing looks tiny underneath it. The N64 isn't crunching math for global conflict behind the curtain. It's just handing you enough empty blue space to let your imagination do the rendering. A lot of games from that era used fog like a tarp thrown over a messy bedroom. Draw distances were expensive, so the world faded in and out before the machine could embarrass itself. Star Fox gets away with it because you're moving too fast to really stare at the seams. With some N64 games, the fog feels like the engine just gave up 10 feet in front of you. Here, it actually feels like atmosphere, which, was also a polite way of saying, please don't look too closely at the horizon. Here, scale comes from framing, where the ship sits, how low the city dips, how long the horizon holds out before a wave of enemy fighters shatter it. Then the radio wakes up. Pepe barks a warning, Slippy panics, Falco complains like saving the Lilat system is completely screwing up his weekend. Those voices are pure nostalgia now, but they were actually solving a genuine engineering problem. Takano explained that rare attacks were tricky, because the player couldn't always see what was coming up behind them. So the squad starts talking. Someone warns you someone needs help. They turn that empty air behind your ship into a threat you can react to. It's basically UI design wearing a cartoon animal face. The squad fills the space that the hardware couldn't. I mean, if you really think about it, I mean, Peppy was the tutorial, Slippy was the scanner with an anxiety disorder, Falco was the backup, assuming you can survive his personality. The game hides his instruction inside relationships. When Slippy gets chased, the battle feels wider because something is happening outside your direct crosshairs. When Falco yells at you to follow him, the level suddenly has a social temperature. I mean, the N64 couldn't populate Corneria with hundreds of ships, so it filled it with voices. The sky isn't empty anymore. It has people in it, the exact kind of people required to make a fake war feel lived in. But hearing a war isn't enough. The illusion needed a physical body.
This is the Rumble Pak. The big reason why Star Fox 64 is the coolest cinematic gaming experience there is. It's designed with a force feedback device that lets players feel the game.
If you played this game near launch, the game and that chunky gray battery hog are permanently welded together in your head. You slip it into the back of the controller, throw in 2 AA batteries, and suddenly the plastic had some weight. I mean, a shot lands, the controller jumps, you clip a wall, it kicks back at you. By modern standards, it's entirely blunt. It's basically a tiny motor coughing into your hand, but in 97, blunt worked. I mean, a few flashing pixels could register physically before your brain could criticize the graphics. It grounds the illusion. I mean, the sky gives you room, the radio fills the silence, and the Rumble Pak just physically hits you. Kids weren't sitting there demanding nuance, haptic feedback. They just wanted controller shakes when ship gets shot. Cool. I mean, the N64 controller already looked like the fossil of a 3-pronged alien bird, which I ended up really liking for some reason, by the way. If you snap into Rumble Pak, then you boot up Star Fox, it felt like cheap military equipment, which honestly was pretty close to perfect. You needed that physical weight because eventually the game was going to throw something at you that took up the entire screen.
Incoming enemy from the rear. Drop altitude.
A boss didn't just appear, it arrived. The rhythm changed, the radio reacted, the camera pulled back to give that thing room. A minute ago, the skies felt wide open. Now this massive machine is parked in the middle of it, eating up half the screen. Most of those bosses aren't impressive because of their polygon count, though. They worked because the game understood timing. Some machine drops in from orbit, a bioweapon raises up out of the muck, or Andros just floats in the void as a giant head with hands. Because 90s game dev was a lawless place, and that's why. For most of the stage, you're just cutting through the world, but then the ride stops and something turns and looks at you. Being on rails means Nintendo controlled the reveal down to the frame. They knew exactly how much screen real estate the boss was going to eat up, how many seconds you had to think, well, this is gonna suck, before the lasers start firing. It's a dark ride with the fire button, and a good ride knows exactly where your eyes are when the monster lunges. Those massive boss fights are a great distraction from the fact that Star Fox 64 is short. Very short, depending on how badly you're playing, but then the route map shows up and quietly points out how little you actually did. One run was not the whole war. There was another path sitting right there, a harder one, a wider one, or maybe you had to save Falco or fly through some specific arches, or maybe you had a cousin who swore that, he knew how to unlock a secret level, but only on his specific cartridge, and you were young and dumb enough to believe him. Lying. I mean, that was the 90s, right? Half of video game culture was just kids lying to each other near school. Not in school, obviously, because school was for losers. The route map made the game feel bigger, just by implying that things were happening in sectors that you weren't in. The game gives you this tight path and lets you stare at the roads that you missed. That does something to a kid's brain. I mean, a tiny decision early on can send the whole campaign somewhere else. The actual game can be finished in an afternoon, The version in your head, though, lasts so much longer, mostly because you never quite shake the feeling that you missed something. You see, you don't have to render a whole war. You just have to throw throw it at the player faster than their little brains can process the low polygon count. When people talk about Star Fox 64, they don't usually start with the lore. They usually start with a sensation. You know, that first run over the waters of Quinaria, Peppy cutting through the static, Slippy needing help yet again. You know, whether you own the cartridge itself or you just rented it from Blockbuster for a very stressful 48 hours, you know, or even if you just played it at a friend's house pretending that you totally knew how to pull off a somersault, the entire point didn't matter. It's the imagery is what stuck. For me specifically, it doesn't sit in my memory like some sprawling epic. It's more like one highly compressed feeling I can picture instantaneously. You know, tiny ship, blue sky, radio noise. It all comes back to Quinaria, a tiny ship flying low over blocky buildings, the green lasers in the blue sky, the sudden overwhelming feeling that the rest of the war was just waiting just off screen. Boot up Star Fox now and you can see the strings. You can see the rails pulling you forward. You can see the simple geometry sliding underneath you, the enemy waves arriving exactly on schedule. But seeing the trick doesn't ruin it. If anything, it makes the engineering more impressive. A small ship, a rig path, the crackling radio compression, and a piece of plastic kicking in your palm. I mean, Star Fox 64 didn't actually simulate a massive space war. It just handed us the blueprint, shook the controller, and let our brains do the rest. Nobody remembers the polygon count. We remember the sky, the way the city dropped away, the voices cutting through the static. Just a tiny ship pushing the whole television forward. And somehow, all these years later, it kinda still works.